and welcome to Property Question Time. I'm Shona Lindsay and I'm joined today in the studio by three experts. Let me introduce you first to John Howard, who is a property developer. Next we have Stephen Galpin, who is a property consultant. And finally, Paul Mahoney, the Managing Director of Nova Financial Group. So gentlemen, we've got a lot to get through today, so I'll crack on with the first question to John, if I may.
Please do.
So, I'm currently working shifts full-time, but get quite a lot of time off work, and I've decided that developing property is the way forward for me. I currently have an £85,000 mortgage on a £120,000 house, although as I earn only £26,000 a year, I feel that I'm at my limit with mortgage payments. Ideally, I would like to keep this house rather than living in the development. I have no credit cards, no loans, and I have no overdraft, so I expect my credit rating to be pretty good. My problem is knowing how to get funding to proceed with buying a property and financing the renovation. I'm looking to buy a property for approximately £80,000 to £120,000 and to spend approximately £10,000 to £20,000 on the renovation. What deposit would I need, if any? Would I need to write out a business plan? Could I add the mortgage payments to the property for the renovation budget? I have contacts for renovations, i.e. a plasterer, plumber, electrician, etc. But I do need some advice on the best way to proceed with my idea. And thanks in advance.
Well, thank him very much for the question.
Or many questions.
Many questions. First of all, I'll be very blunt. He hasn't got any money.
Right.
That's the first thing. Because unless he sells his home. So I don't advise him selling his home and his family. He wants to keep his job, keep his home, and he needs to find a like-minded person who has got some money. And he needs to get together with him or her, and they need to buy it together.
So the person who sent the question in would do the work.
Exactly. Organise it, find it, organise it, which is no different to what I do a lot of the time with my backers. So my backers have the money.
Yes.
And I sort the rest out for them. I'm very spoiled. So
instead
in a much bigger scale, obviously, but to start with, there's nothing wrong with that. So if you can find a like-minded person who's got who's got some money, then that's the way to do it, and partner up with them. Do a small scheme to start with, so they get to know each other, and take it from there. And
work out, what side of the equation
Absolutely.
they both
There's
have.
no point the partners doing the same thing. So one partner has a bit of money, puts the money in, the other part, and keeps hold of the finances and everything else, and the other partner probably finds the deal, organises the work, does some of the work perhaps as well. It's part of his or hers, payment in the deal.
So our viewers presumably written this question hoping that they might be able to release equity from the house that they have at the moment, but you're saying there's not enough equity there to do that.
Not enough equity there, and even if they could, it's a huge risk, and I wouldn't take that risk.
Right.
You know what, doing property development or renovation on a shoestring is a dangerous game. I'm afraid things very rarely go to plan, and if you run out of money, you're back to zero and minus.
And then you're trying to sell a property that isn't finished and nobody wants it.
Exactly. Also, if you've got a family, it's huge pressure on the family. And the first thing I always ask someone, and I get asked a lot, I want to do this, I want to give my job up, and I want to do what you do, and all these things. And I always say to them, first of all, have you got, is your partner, if you have a family and partner, are they behind you?
Yeah.
Because if they're not, the pressure on you is just immense.
And the hours that you have to put in. I mean, we watch these television programmes.
We do.
That will remain nameless, and it all seems very seamless and very easy. We cut from that initial shot to the finished shot, and we've not seen the pain, the stress that people have gone through.
And the other thing I would say, the other thing I would say is that actually you don't need to give your job up to do it.
No.
Because you need a lot of properties to be busy.
Yes.
So you can easily do 4 or 5 while you're still working. If you're not doing the building work yourself, you're just checking on it, chasing things up, and so on. So keep the income coming in. I live the dream, but it's taken me a long time to live the dream. Exactly.
Great, thank you.
Just one more point to add to that. I think because of a lot of those nameless TV shows,
yes,
it's in some people's mind, it's assumed that you're going to make more money by developing property than any other option in investing in property, and that's not necessarily the case. Especially with smaller renovation projects, if this person's just starting out, they're not necessarily going to make a fortune from property developing. And there might be other options given their skill set where they could do better.
Yes.
Or at least take less risk. So I suppose my point there is don't assume that by doing some work and
Just
getting
by
your hands
developing.
dirty that you're going to make a fortune, because that's not always the case.
No, good point.
Thank you. I've got a question for you, Stephen, if I may. I'm trying to find a piece of land on which to build my dream home. Ideally, this would be within the M25, but I do prefer the idea of being in a small town or village. How do I go about finding land that might be suitable? Is there a central register or something similar to that?
Okay, well the simple answer to that is, I suppose, yes, there is a kind of register, and it'll be a register that's held by the local planning authority that will be able to show on the internet or wherever else you search it what's been given planning permission, but it's quite a complex job doing that. And don't forget that there'll be numerous developers doing exactly the same thing. So I think I would approach it probably rather differently. I think what I'd try and do is identify a little bit more closely the town or the village that I wanted to be in. I'd go in, I'd spend a lot of time talking to the local agents, registering with the local agents, in the hope that perhaps I was tipped off about things coming to the market before they get marketed, before developers perhaps have completed their planning consents or wish lists for land in that area. And I think essentially the town or the village is the real key to where you want to be. It's no good having a super plot of land in some way you don't like.
Well, it's not going to be the dream home
It's
then,
not going
is
to be the
it?
dream
No.
home at all.
No.
So, as I say, the planning lists published on the sites are a way of checking what the status of a piece of land is, but the real key, I think, is get to know your local agent in the area that you want to be. I don't think you can do better than that, really.
Stephen, I think you're spot on. You know, go and see the local agent as regularly as you can. Go and see them, talk to them, take them some donuts, coffee, you know, and hope for the best.
I mean, the other thing is too, you've obviously got to consider the sort of budget that you've got here, and again, I think probably Paul would confirm, a good thing to do is to make some inquiries as to the sort of budget that you're going to be able to manage. You know, what's that going to mean in terms of borrowing? Are you going to be able to do that? Where are you going to live in the meantime while you're building this property? And, you know, again, a good mortgage broker or good lending broker will assist you with that and give you some guidance. And I think that's critical.
I suppose the fear for someone like this might be that if they're not taking it from a register where the planning permission's already gone through, the implications of just finding a plot of land and then the additional thing of getting their own planning permission for that, and what if they don't?
We've talked on different programmes about approaching local authority, planning departments. There is usually a duty planner on duty every day in most of these authorities' planning divisions. They will be wonderfully helpful. They'll guide you, they'll steer you, they'll tell you what the plan and the aspirations for the village or town are, and whether what you're wanting to do is practical and would have a realistic chance of obtaining planning. I wouldn't suggest for a house project, if you haven't done it before, I wouldn't recommend doing that yourself. You would need a planning agent or a good firm of chartered surveyors locally.
Yeah, you would. And square footage is important as well, or meterage, because, you know, how big do you want the house?
Yes.
Because the bigger it is, the more expensive it is to build. So you might want some mansion, but only be able to afford a much smaller build. So you need to know.
And that goes back to you talking about managing that finance side of it.
Yeah.
So now I have a question for Paul. I just rented my flat out for the first time, £800 per calendar month rent with an agency fee of 10% per month deducted. I'm looking to work out how much I'd be looking to pay in tax. I'm afraid I'm not understanding a lot of the terms and calculations thrown at me, so I was hoping someone could please explain the process and also what would be taken into account in working out how much tax I would pay per month.
Okay, good question. I'm not a tax advisor, but I know the answer.
Right.
So essentially, the £800 gross rent per annum, that's $9,600. Sorry, per month. That's $9,600 per annum.
Yes.
They're paying 10% management, so that's £80 a month. So what's that? That means that they'll deduct £960 from their total profit. So they'll pay tax on about $9,000 or thereabouts. But other things to consider are maintenance, assuming they've got a mortgage on the property, depending on their tax band, whether they're a basic rate taxpayer or a higher rate taxpayer, will determine how much of that mortgage interest they'll be able to deduct.
Yes.
With the changes with regards to Section 24, which is quite misleading because the way it's written says that buy-to-let mortgage interest will no longer be tax deductible at all, but you do receive a tax credit at 20%, which means that if their employment income plus their property income is less than $45,000, then it will essentially still be deductible.
Yeah.
So if they're a base rate taxpayer, they don't have to worry too much about Section 24. They can claim all their mortgage interest effectively, and it will essentially be total income minus all expenses, and they'll be taxed on the net income at their basic rate of 20%.
Okay.
If they're a higher rate taxpayer, that's a little bit more complicated, and it will change over the coming years up to 2020. If that's the case, they're mad not to get tax advice to see how that would affect them. Because, you know, for example, if they have a high mortgage, that property may not even be profitable to rent out. If they've got no mortgage at all, then again, they don't have to worry about it. If it's somewhere in between, then maybe they do, maybe they don't.
Yes.
So definitely seek tax advice. But in simple terms, the way the tax is calculated is your income minus your expenses, and then you're taxed on the net amount.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. So that's all we've got time for in this half of the programme, but please do join us after the break for more questions for our expert. So John, I have a question for you. Hi, we're looking into a new build property with a small developer. The company itself is very small and was set up 14 months ago. But I've done a Google search on the guy in charge, and he seems to have been involved as a director with 13 different development companies since 1996. He's currently serving as a director in 3 companies. Is this normal in the building industry? And how else can we make sure that this person is a trustworthy contractor?
Okay, well, don't Google me is the answer, because I've got considerably more than that. What I would say is to check whether any of those companies have gone bankrupt.
Right.
That's the first thing. The second thing I would do is to ask him what was his latest project.
Right.
And ask him if he wouldn't mind you contacting the owners of that to see if they were happy with his work.
It's effectively a reference.
I would say so, yes. And if all that comes back fine, then good luck.
There's no reason why he can't be a director on several companies.
Not at all, not at all.
It's just whether any of those companies
The
were
only
in
thing that makes me
trouble.
a bit suspicious is that he was 13 or 14 and he's been involved in 13 or 14 companies, but he's now only a director of 3. So, you know, you just have to do
what happened to the other 10?
You just have to check.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think if you look at the maths there, look, that's over 22 years,
Yes,
isn't it?
shows he's got experience.
So he has got experience, and if you look at, say, let's take a normal house build of, say, 2 or 3 houses or 4 houses, a 2-year time span is quite normal. So 12 times 2, that's 24 years. It'd be quite normal to be employed on a specific project and then move on to the next. So it needn't necessarily be a down point.
Right. I think the idea of being able to go and see, especially if it is a small company, you should be able to make contact with a previous employer.
And even if it's a new company, so well, this is a new company, you can still go back and say, well, what else have you done in the past?
Yes.
And talk to them. And the bigger thing about when you're having a house built for yourself, the biggest thing a lot of these builders want to do is get a lot of money up front.
Right.
Do not allow that to happen. Only pay for the work that's been done a month in arrears. If they start saying, oh, I need half the money up front or a third of it up front to get materials, alarm bells, go to someone else.
So you wouldn't give any money up front at all?
No.
So literally you want to see something done.
Absolutely.
And you pay for it.
You'll have a
as it's done.
contract that is signed, hopefully. You need professional advice. So you want a schedule of works to make sure that the builder knows exactly what he's building. So there's no argument there. And you want to go out to tender with him and others probably and get the prices back, and you need a building surveyor to oversee it for you and advise you please don't try and do it all on your own, especially if it's your first attempt.
Yes.
Don't do it.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, Stephen, I think you have a golden nugget of information for us. Is that right?
Well, I'm going to hijack your spot, I'm afraid. And I'm going to say this. I'm very passionate about young people getting on our housing ladder, which we're reading about in the news as being impossible day by day. Rental properties being short and people even having trouble finding rents to pay. And I do think that the government is in a position to do something about it. Now, I've been very fortunate. I was involved in a programme that Property TV here have initiated about looking at stamp duty. Now, the suggestion is that stamp duty be moved from the buyer to the seller. Now, there are some complex arguments about that. The classic one would be, well, I've paid stamp duty going into my house, why would I pay it going out? But nevertheless, a credit system could be sought which says, okay, well, whatever you've paid coming in, you can credit that against you going out, and that would only last for a short period of time. There's the alternative idea of a sales transaction tax, which again, maybe we've come to the end because of the demands on our budgets these days. Care for older people, universal credit needs funding properly, NHS needs more funding. So perhaps we've come to the end of the time when we can just buy and sell our homes totally tax-free and often make quite substantial profits. And I think a change of emphasis for stamp duty from, as I say, from buyer to seller would perhaps alleviate that a little bit and perhaps be politically acceptable. There are other things. I'm very much against long-term, and I'm sorry, my developer colleague here is going to get very upset because you know what I'm going to say. I'm going to say I'm very, very anti selling from plan too far before completion. It causes inflation. Why? Because property developers say, well, look, it's going to take me 3 years to build this thing. I'm going to pop in 10% per annum growth, so my price is 30% above the current market value. So what does somebody selling their house do? Say, well, do you know what? I think I'll just add 20% today and there we are. So you're building in inflation, just making it harder and harder and harder for people to buy and get on the property ladder. Paul will talk no doubt about, you know, loan to value percentages. Again, the Bank of England, yes, they've strengthened the bank's balance sheets, but they've done it at the cost of our young people to a great degree, demanding 30 and 40% deposits. There needs to be a relaxation there, and I'm really not convinced that we'll end up with a country full of delinquent borrowers simply because we give them high loan-to-value mortgages.
But Stephen, I hear what you say, but I mean, the government have invested 10 billion into Help to Buy scheme. 10 billion, which is a huge amount of money.
Well, it is, unless you look at the take-up figures, and it's not that great. And a lot of the schemes have helped the developers rather more than they have the purchasers.
But first-time buyers don't pay stamp duty at the moment either. That's the other issue.
Well, no, but you've
Up
got
to 300 grand,
yeah, you've got to remember. I mean, in London, look, again, we're in the Nova Hotel here, 2 minutes from Canary Wharf. You've got average one-bedroom flat prices in new developments.
Way
here
over that 300.
at £800,000.
Yes.
But Shona, let's be fair. You're the king of London. You're talking about London, and you're a very experienced consultant, property consultant in London. You're an expert. But we do have the rest of the country. Certainly up north, you've got no problems at all up to £300,000 in terms of buying stuff.
We do indeed. But in the programme that I mentioned earlier, we interviewed John Stevenson, who's an MP for Carlisle, and my specific question to him was, are you getting the same kind of problems in your surgery that, you know, we're experiencing here in London? Because he had the benefit of seeing both sides of the coin, and the answer was yes.
I think clearly, gentlemen, we could probably do an entire episode or possibly a month's worth of episodes just on that one question. It's brilliant. Thank you, Stephen. But I must give Paul his final question of the episode. So, Paul, my daughter has sold her home and made quite a serious amount of money on the transaction. She's about to invest the profits in another property, but 50% of the value has to be loaned to her. I'm concerned that she might be doing this without thinking it through, and some of the implications of being a landlord might not have been thought through properly, and she may end up regretting it. Is there any training? Are there any courses, anything like that that she could do for new landlords?
Okay. The way that's been put, 50% of the money needs to be lent to her. I
Yes.
assume that means she needs to borrow 50%
A
of the
mortgage,
value
that's
of
what
the
I'm
property,
thinking, it's a 50%.
which is pretty standard
Yeah,
practice. In
yes.
fact, I'd say 50% is quite conservative.
Yes.
Given that the average maximum, if you like, is around 75%, where lenders will still lend to you at pretty effective tax rates.
Indeed,
Sorry, interest rates. So I wouldn't be too worried about her borrowing, because remembering it's investment debt, which in my view is good debt, and that's not a bad thing. In fact, I'd say most people need to borrow to invest to really achieve financial goals. So that's not a bad thing. She definitely needs to go into it with her eyes open, and she definitely needs to educate herself or align herself with a person or a company that can guide her. She shouldn't just go down and speak to a local estate agent, buy a property and put it on Zoopla. Because what she hasn't experienced before is using an investment sort of mindset when it comes to using property to actually make money. Sounds like she's bought a home or she sold a home and made money on it, but that was probably by accident because she's bought that place because she likes to live there. It's emotional criteria as opposed to commercially minded criteria.
In the natural capital growth with that.
Exactly. So either there's a load of courses of varying quality. There's lots of books that she could definitely read.
There are.
Very
There's
good books
a very
on
good
the
book.
market, yeah.
Yeah,
and one coming up.
There's loads of books. So she should educate herself, but she should definitely seek advice from various professionals and understand what those professionals can advise her on. For example, a mortgage advisor will advise on mortgages, an accountant will advise on tax. There are various new services around people that will advise on property investment and actually help her find the right things to achieve the goals she's working toward. So seek that advice, educate herself and make an educated and commercially minded decision.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you to all of your input on that final question. Well, that's all we've got time for today on Property Question Time. But don't forget, if you do have any questions for our experts, do log on to the website, which is www.property-tv.co.uk, or you can send a direct email to us at info@propertytelevision.tv. All that's left is for me to say thank you to my guests today. I'm Shona Lindsay, and we'll see you soon. Bye.